All right. Hi. Welcome. My name is Elizabeth Johnson Phillips, and I am the content developer for MPWRSource. And I am here today with two wonderful experts that are going to help us look at how to enter the new normal and reopen up our businesses and everything we need to think about. And I've got Tommie Deaner, who is an HR expert, and she is going to help us know what questions to ask and where the blind spots may be. And Tiffany is the Chief Growth Officer here at MPWRSource, and she is going to help us know how to talk about the blind spots that Tommie is going to bring up so that we can know where the problems are and know how to talk about them in a smart and intelligent way that creates calm versus panic. And so I'm going to let both of them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they bring to the table, and then we will get the ball rolling. Tommie, we're going to start with you.
Great, thanks. My name's Tommie Deaner, and I've been in human resources for over 20 years in a variety of different industries, financial services, energy, and medical practices. And I have been living and breathing COVID-19 as everybody else has. And so I really want to be able to share some of the key learnings and HR experiences that I've uncovered navigating this new landscape.
And Tiffany?
Thanks, Elizabeth, or as we call Word Girl. I'm Tiffany Greene. I've been in the marketing and public relations business for, again, same as Tommie, for about 20 years. It's amazing how much, I've been working since, I guess, 10? Right, you Tommie?
Mm-hmm. And practically since birth. Practically since birth.
Yeah. I know, right? And so let me just talk a little bit about MPWRSource. If you're not aware, MPWRSource brings a lot of small business solutions, including IT, compliance, marketing, communications, HR services, and also business management services. And the reason why we offer all those services to small businesses is because we believe all those things shouldn't exist in silos, and we like to bring them together in what we like to call a spider web, much like Spider-Man spider web. So they all work together, serving the common purpose of growing revenue, establishing peace of mind, and creating efficiencies. So just like Tommie, I've been really focused on COVID-19, just like everybody else, because within communications and within marketing, it's obviously something you cannot deny or ignore.
That is great. And so, I know here in Virginia, Friday was kind of a big day. The 15th was, we are now, at least large portions of Virginia are entering phase 1, which means I got to get my hair colored. And, but some municipalities are not, like Northern Virginia is not, Richmond City is not. And so that may also be something we need to discuss, how if you have multiple offices in different counties, what you need to think about as well. But if I am a small business owner, or if I own a business, what is sort of the first thing I need to think about as I reopen up? Tommie, what is my first task?
I think the first thing is to have a plan. And, I think a lot of times we just start going because we're so excited to reopen that we haven't really thought through all of the specific details and how our employees might be impacted. So really sitting down and being deliberate about when you're going to bring your employees back, thinking about how you're going to bring them back, and then what measures you need to put in place to ensure that they stay safe. So social distancing, kind of looking at the layout of even your store or your office or your salon, and making sure that, you do that in a smart manner. I think the second thing is really understand where are your employees. So making sure that you're reaching out to your employees, surveying them either through direct communication or some sort of email or survey, just to say, how are you doing? Do you have challenges coming back because, schools are still closed, daycares aren't reopening yet, camps got canceled, and we're heading into summer months. And so really kind of understanding where your employees are and figuring out what can you do to either support that or what you might not be able to support. And so those are all decisions that you're going to have to make through this process. So I would start really with the planning piece of it. And then from there, I'm sure Tiffany can talk about some of the communication things.
Well, I would say in terms of communication, one of the things that you said that I always love is first survey your employees, because as a marketer, I'm absolutely love any kind of market research, which that falls under that. So surveying your employees, and obviously if you're in a really small business, actually just having one-on-one conversations with your employees to see where they're at, what's going on personally, like you said, with their children, with possible daycare, how they feel in terms of just COVID-19. Elizabeth can attest to this, that at our last growth meeting, I started the meeting with, where are you on the spectrum of 1 to 10 regarding COVID-19 pandemic? 1 meaning like, hey, I'm having hardly no effect at all, and 10, I'm about to go in a straitjacket. I'm having panic attacks left and right. So, but that helped. And, the follow-up question is, based on where you're at, what can we do to help you? Within reason. I can't invent a cure. I wish I could. That's not in my wheelhouse, but what can we do to help you? So I think again, it's about open lines of communication and just trying to manage with empathy. Somebody's getting ready to homeschool right now. Get in the computer. He's got to watch some YouTube videos. There you go. So multitasking at its finest. So it's really about empathizing, right? So not only internally, like you were saying with your planning, but before you get going with the plans, right, is having those conversations with your employees and empathizing with wherever they're at. So that way, whatever plan you come up with isn't just about the business, but it's about the people that make your business. I think that's the key. And that's the same thing you should be doing with your clients or customers as well, right? Is empathizing them and to best serve them in the best way possible.
So what I kind of hear both of you saying is that you kind of, when you fly on an airplane and I think they're called flight attendants now. They're not stewardesses. Flight attendant talks to you about, in the event of a crash or whatever, you need to put on your mask first and then tend to the person next to you. So as you enter into a new normal, you need to take care of your family, your business, your employees first. Yes, you want to be customer focused or client focused, sure. But you have to, in order to meet your client needs, you have to meet your employee needs first and make sure that your employees feel safe, feel healthy, and that their needs are met first. Is that be a correct assessment of what you both ladies said?
I think that's a really great analogy, EJ, because, at the end of the day, if we take care of our employees, they're going to take care of our customers and our clients. And so, leading the way that way, that's an excellent example. I love that.
Thank you. So in order to take care of our employees, Tommie, what in terms of, what guidelines do we need to be following? There's a million, I guess one of the additional bad things about the COVID-19 situation is that, everybody and their brother has an opinion, and everybody and their brother apparently is an expert, or their chiropractor is an expert, or their next door neighbor, or someone. But for a small business, what guidelines do we need to be following, and what voices do we need to be listening to?
Yeah, I would say that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, have tremendous amount of resources out there related to how to prevent the spread of the disease. I think when you take that guidance and you apply it to the workplace, it's really about practicing the things that make the most sense, right? Good hygiene protocols, making sure that your employees are washing their hands whenever they're coming into contact with other people or surfaces that might be touched a lot, making sure to socially distance where possible. Wearing masks has been recommended in many cases for people interacting less than 6 feet apart. So if you're in a high interaction industry like hair cutting or healthcare or food service, that might be something that you want to consider having your employees do. So, you know, there's just a lot of things that you have to think about your workplace and how it's structured, and how those various client and employee interactions might be happening, and take appropriate steps and guidelines to support that. And then secondly, making sure that your employees know what you're going to be doing. And I'm sure Tiffany can talk to this a little bit, but, you know, part of keeping people calm is making sure that you're clearly and effectively communicating your expectations, as well as your approach as an employer, and making sure that your employees are on board with that.
That makes perfect sense, because I know humans by nature are we're storytellers. Mm-hmm. And so I think if they don't have information, their brain's going to connect the dots. So mm-hmm. It's best to communicate the information and communicate those guidelines. And I know, Tiffany, you, we were chatting a little bit about this before. You have some great resources and ideas on things that employers can do to communicate to their staff. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, again, talking to your staff, it's a matter of what policies and procedures are you going to put in place. But I think one of the more important things you need to be communicating is the why are you putting those procedures and policies in place, so that they know that you've come to these conclusions to make them safe, to do whatever is in your power for them. If they get the why, then I think you'll get greater buy-in, and they'll also feel much safer working in that environment. I also think there's a lot of tools and resources out there. I know the United States Chamber of Commerce has a wide variety of resources for you to be able to communicate with your clients and with your employees. They even got wonderful flyers that you can insert your own logo into and post them around the workplace. So there are some tools, so you don't have to go around reinventing the wheel, right? As we all know how busy we are all. So I'm sure, Elizabeth, you'll post that on our website as well. But also just with your employees, there's a wide variety. You know, if you're still teleworking, how are we going to communicate all these messages? You know, it's not a matter of like, let's get that staff meeting together in the snack room. Elizabeth's missing our snacks, but
I am not. I'm down 5 pounds in quarantine, so I would not. No, I would say I am missing them. I am missing them greatly, but now it's intentional.
So it's a matter of like, how are you going to use the resources that you have at hand to communicate effectively with your employees? So like for us, we're using Teams, right, to do not only this webinar, but we're doing that for our meetings, and we're still structuring our meetings and getting together and having those important conversations. Also, you can be utilizing email, are using Teams for messages, and then determining the amount of message you're delivering obviously determines what venue you use or channel to use to communicate it with. Obviously, before reopen, I would encourage everybody to do, at least if you're teleworking, a virtual meeting, face-to-face.
I would also say, to piggyback on something you said, you know, engage your employees in that return to work process too. They might have solutions and ideas that you hadn't even thought about. And so, you know, get them engaged, get them to try out new things. You know, maybe you might want to consider doing extended hours so that you can support the social distancing. And maybe some of your employees who have childcare issues might love that, because that means they can come in later while their children are while their children are occupied with their schooling. So there's just some different approaches, and be creative about that during this period, because your employees might have some ideas and solutions and suggestions on how to approach reopening as well.
And I'd like to add to that, I think just in general, whenever you have a crisis, right, comes an opportunity to to grow, to change, to think outside the box and do new things. So I think talking with your employees, not only from a what works for you perspective, but even in terms of your business and how you deliver your product or service to your customers or clients, now's the time to really brainstorm and utilize all that, human capital that you have to come up with new ideas to meet the demands of the marketplace. Now's the time, because it's not going to be like it was back in January 2019. We are in a new normal, and needs and of the marketplace have changed. So your employees, who best knows your clients than those who serve them? This is the time to really find out how you can serve your clients even better, and you need to do that with your employees to find that out.
And I can speak to that in terms as an employee. When I am consulted, not only do I feel valued and like my employer taking me seriously, but you have buy-in. Mm-hmm. So, and that a lot of times, whenever you're working towards a common goal, some of its success or failure completely depends upon everybody from the top down's buy-in to the idea. So the more you can incorporate more voices and bring some more to the table, the greater the likelihood that your customers' needs are going to be met, that it's going to be a successful transition. Because like you said, you may have employees who need to come in earlier before their kids are awake and their spouse is home, or they can get childcare, or they may later in the day might be better. And as an employer, you may be thinking, well, they're not going to want to be open more because now, but they may all be itching to get out of the house, but also still wanting to be safe. And how can we, and they may have better ideas, or you may be ready to purchase all these masks, and you may have an employee that's how they're staying sane, is by sewing masks. And so you bring that as a, completely random, non-specific example that has nothing to do with me. But it's great to sort of ask these questions of your employees so that their ideas can be heard and they can be valued. Another thing as I was doing some research for today, coming up with some different things, things will be different. You will most likely, as an employer, require some checking ins, people when you're going into places. I've seen a lot, taking your temperature of employees. I know when I took my kids to their well child visit last week, they took my temperature too. And I'm like, Lenny, I'm just here to pay. But they took my temperature before I could even go in. And so one question I had, it may be different for salaried employees versus hourly employees, but who gets our employees compensated for that extra 15 minutes of time? Tommie, I feel like that's an HR thing. How is that going to happen?
Yeah, so I think the Fair Labor Standards Act requires that we compensate employees for all hours worked if they're non-exempt or hourly paid. And so there's some guidance about getting on your uniform in advance, that you have to pay for that. So I think this is going to be something that's going to be kind of a new area, is a temperature check or screening coming into the building going to be compensable? And so that's a great question. I would say if it's taking 15, 20 minutes to get through your building and your screening, then you might want to consider and build that into, your pay and your day for your employee. Most businesses that I've been to that are doing temperature checks, it's not taking but a minute or so. So I don't really see that as being a big issue from a employer perspective. One thing I will say, though, is if you're not a medical company or a medical practice or a dental practice and you don't have people who are trained on how to take temperature checks and do screenings, if you plan on implementing that, please make sure that you're doing it appropriately. The no contact thermometers, make sure that your employees are trained on how to do that before you ask them to do those types of things, because that's going to be really critical as well. So, don't stick the thermometer in somebody's mouth and not wipe it down, and, make sure you're taking the appropriate safety measures to keep both your clients and your employees safe if you're going to implement something like that.
And Elizabeth, I noticed you laughed, but that is a true story.
Yeah.
I'm sure, but I am not medically trained, but I have 4 kids, which is like half of med school, I feel like. So, I mean, even I know to wipe down the thermometer in between. But I mean, that's something I would have never thought of because to me, it's a no-brainer. Well, I know how to take a temperature, but also sometimes I don't because my temperature now, all the temperature thermometers are digital. And like half the time I swipe it, I have one that I swipe here and it'll say error, error, or half the time I'm like, okay, I know 74 degrees is not correct. I am dead. That's not true. And so sometimes you're exactly right that it seems kind of foolish to think, well, you need to be trained to know, but there's probably, and I'm going to guess, and you please do correct me, there's probably information on the CDC website about how to do that correctly. Correct? Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. I'm just, when I go to post this, I'm going to make sure I have links to stuff on the CDC and stuff on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce along with it, just to make sure that people, when they watch this, they can have immediate access to those resources.
Add something on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce website. The nice thing too is they keep everything up to date based on state and locale. So if you are like in California, you can go to California, you click on California, your actual state, and it'll have all the guidelines there and things just specific to your locale, which is really nice.
That is great that they break it down that way, because everywhere is, I have friends on my Facebook feed. There's people living in South Carolina. I'm like, hate you. You're at the beach. Yeah. And I am like trying to figure out this weekend. I'm like, well, I want to order food, but they're still closed because they're in Richmond City and not the county. And so trying to figure stuff like that out. So some of the things that y'all have spoken to, I'm trying to think of, how would you encourage employers who may have discovered that a lot more of their work can be done from home than they first imagined? I mean, I know we all saw the memes at the beginning of this. Well, now we're about to find out which meetings really could have been emails. Well, we found out a lot more of them than, So, but I imagine for some employers, there's a real rub there because you have to trust your employees a different bit. So, how would you speak? Y'all are both, employers and deal with this sort of things all the time. How would you speak to those fears that an employer might have with if we have people in government saying, if you can stay home, stay home. If you can work from home, work from home. And employers may be wanting their staff to come back when they've been working from home for 2 months. Fine. And maybe not everyone in your business needs to come back to the brick and mortar place of business. Maybe half of them can stay home, which that's going to help with your social distancing. But you may have scared employers. So how would you speak to that?
Yeah, so I would say, again, getting back to my original point, start with your plan, right? And part of that plan is going to be assessing who really does need to come back into the workplace. And I think from there, if you're going to continue to allow your employees to telework, setting expectations and managing performance isn't any different when the person is sitting at their home office or they're sitting in your office. And so, as a leader, I have, it's been very rare for me to have all of my employees in one location. I've had my employees spread all across the East Coast, all across the state of Virginia. So I don't even get to see them in their office. And so part of it is about, setting measurable goals and objectives, making sure that you're doing frequent check-ins with your employees, that you're recalibrating your expectations. You're checking to see, are they meeting their performance expectations? And if they're not, you can continue to deal with it from a performance perspective. So I think that those are, just good leadership principles. And so, sometimes with the telework, it's not so much about where you sit, but getting back to the basics from a leadership perspective.
And I would just think from my standpoint, I've heard a lot of business owners who they're nervous about extending the telework simply because there is a lack of trust of their employees. So I'm under the mindset that telework, depending on, obviously what industry you're in, if they've been able to do their work for the last 2 months from home and you've been seeing good results, then why not extend it? If
Mhm.
the issue is you, meaning like you have a trust issue, that's something you need to evaluate for yourself and not subject that to your employee. And I do think that we need to shift our mindset that, only in the office does that really count as work, or we have to do 8 to 5. Does it have to occur 8 to 5? I know you, Elizabeth, you'll tell me some of your best work is when I'm sleeping. So, and I'm okay with that, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's obviously job specific in what you're doing, but at the end of the day, it's like Tommie said, are you delivering what you're supposed to be delivering? Are the objectives being met?
And I will say that some employees want to come back into the office, right? And so that's another piece that employers are going to have to balance, because maybe you can't bring that person back into the office because you need to continue to socially distance and you need to bring other employees in. And so, it's a balancing act, and you're going to have to really assess that and come up with your plan again on how you're going to bring people back into the workplace as we navigate this new landscape. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at my different questions here. Sorry for looking down. One thing that employers may need to communicate as we enter into this landscape is that there are going to be some businesses that don't re-enter the new landscape, that have not weathered the storm well, that to think of it as a storm that may have some shutters missing, that they may have to make some organizational changes from an HR perspective. And I mean, this is an area where they're both going to communications and HR are going to come together. What is the best way to communicate with your employees that, hey guys, we're going to have to cut back, or hey, I would like for you to bring you back in, but the employees, you're not going to have the same amount of hours. You're not going to have, there may be a ramp up stage. This may be, as you discussed, having a plan, this is the 3-month plan. This is the 6-month plan. This is the 9-month plan. What are the words to use, I guess, if you have to give bad news?
I mean, I think just like that. Right? Be direct and, be transparent and open with your employees. If you don't know what the plan is going to be, it's okay to say that. I think if you think they're going to come back at reduced hours, communicate that. And again, I think it gets back to engaging your employees in the conversation, because they may actually have some ideas and suggestions and thoughts about it too, that you hadn't thought about. And so, be clear, be direct, be honest, be open, and make sure that, you talk to them.
And I would say, and going back to the most important word, which is empathize with everybody and where they're at, and to understand that to let them know that they're being seen and that they're being heard and that they're being considered in the plans that you're making. That is what's key. I know for unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I have a lot of crisis communications background. I've had to make a lot of bad announcements where hundreds of people are about going to lose their jobs. And the key to get you through that is to let the employees know that they do matter, that they're not just a number in the wheel of whatever business you're in, but literally they matter and that you're here for them. And if by chance, your business, like you said, is not weathering the storm, and let's say you might have to close your business or really get back down to like just yourself, let's just say that if you're a small business owner, what can you do for those that you have to let go? What will you do for them? What kind of assistance? Is it through a reference? What will you do for them? So that, again, because, sometimes as a small business owner, or just a business owner, or even a CEO of a corporation, you feel sometimes like a lot of times that the weight of the world is on your shoulders, right? And you're in this alone, but the truth of the matter is you're not in it alone. If you set up a team, everybody's feeling it with you. You need to band together even through the tough times, and even if the hard decisions have to be made.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to, I've seen corporations and companies communicate poorly. And I think you see those companies in the news from a media perspective because they've, just given somebody a box and told them to walk out the door, versus those that, try to provide as much advance notice, try to clearly communicate the reasoning behind the decisions, empathizing, letting your employees know that this was not easy. And, again, just being open, honest, and direct. I think I've seen those employers build brand loyalty and commitment even after those employees have left because they were treated well through that process. So think about making sure that you're caring for the people that you're having to tell your message to and letting them know that you care about them. And it's okay to be vulnerable and to let them know it was difficult. That will go a long way in building that employee commitment and engagement to you.
And I have to say, too, when you're making these, like when you're communicating this, and maybe, Tommie, you can even elaborate more on this, but I find the worst thing to do is when you're delivering this difficult news is go on about yourself.
Yeah.
This was so difficult for me to do. I didn't really want to have to do this to you. I mean, I couldn't sleep for nights. I mean, the employee, then you're putting it back on the employee to have to make you feel better.
Let me comfort you while you've just fired me. Really, it's so hard for you with your job, really? That's what I would be hearing. I'd be like, ah.
Yes, and that's like the worst possible. You gotta, it's okay to say this was really difficult for me to get to this point, but then that's it. The rest is about the employee.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
And I think we have seen throughout all of COVID-19 that I think, number one, the public is expecting there to be changes. There's expecting to be time shifts. We're actually wanting to see changes from things on the ground of your business. But there's been, people applauding companies that have, during the pandemic, essential things, I want to say like Lowe's and Home Depot started closing on Sundays where they never did before to give their staff a day off. And they started, closing earlier to make sure things were clean. And the public actually was excited about that and said, here's a large company taking care of their employees. So there can be a selfish aspect to taking care of your own too, because your employees are consumers elsewhere too, and they speak, and they're going to speak highly about their experience at your business. Another thing I was thinking about how different, I mean, it's obvious to me, but a little bit, how different does my internal communication of what's going on in my business need to be from my external? Because there's going to need to be external communications about the policies as well. The public's going to want to know what you're doing in your office or business to keep them safe. So what do I need to communicate to the public that I'm doing?
Well, I think with how you communicate with the public or with your clients has to be also transparent, because they want to know whatever you're doing for your employees is also helping them be safe, and also to get buy-in, like you were talking about. If you get everybody's buy-in, everything's better. So if they feel like you're taking care of your employees, they like your company. They want to back you're getting brand loyalty, right? But it's also by protecting the employees, you're protecting them. Because it's to carry it carries that message from internal to external. Now, do you need to necessarily give every single detail that you gave to your internal employees? Probably not. But the main gist, in your messaging, there needs to be what we call in the communications world, what is your core message? What is the main point that you're trying to get out? That core message should be consistent with your internal and your external. It's a matter of the details that may need to shift between those communications.
Agreed.
Yeah, and can I just make a plea as a writer and as someone who's put out these communications? Can we stop using the phrase "in these trying times"? Can we find another catchphrase? I mean, every radio commercial, every email, in these, like, we get it. Times are trying. Let's find a new catchphrase. That's going to be my plea, my advice to whomever watches this is find a different. I don't know what it needs to be for you, but let's drop the catchphrase in these trying times.
Well, what we're finding already through market research is the marketers are sick of all these phrases, but they're still working on the mass people. So I apologize,
because
Elizabeth.
these, in fact, are trying times, and we are in them.
Correct. So we can't ignore the obvious. It's just as us in our roles, Elizabeth, we're just using them more frequently and hearing them more frequently even than the masses. So we're the first ones to kind of take a disliking to them. But in truth, those messages are what's speaking to people right now. Again, it's not ignoring what's out there or not ignoring what is. It's about acknowledging it. And we are in trying times. Everybody's got their catchphrase right now that they hate.
Yeah, I think that though, Elizabeth, you raise a good point, because as your messaging and the keywords that you were using back in March for your employees and your customers are different than the keywords and the messaging that you're using in May, because this pandemic has gone so quickly. And so I would really encourage, as you're bringing your employees back into the workplace, how do you pivot your internal communications to the future, and the things that I'm putting into place to bring you back? And how are we going to, weather this storm, get to the other side, being more optimistic. I think that because that will help your employees really kind of have a little more confidence coming back in, and again, shifting to the future. So I think right now we're kind of at that pivoting point of moving from in these trying times, which they are, and like they do really resonate, to now how do we move and shift to this new phase 1, phase 2 approach. And so I think we're going to start probably hearing some changes in internal and external messaging in the coming weeks and months towards that. So it'll be interesting to watch it all play out, because it's so dynamic right now. It's really crazy. So.
And is it crazy for me to think that employers probably, as they bring people back in, probably not the first week, but they need to have a narrative in the back of their mind of, okay, this is where we are today. What happens if there's a relapse and we have to go back to quarantine? Are those conversations that need to be happening? Or is that just me being crazy?
No, I mean, I agree with you, and I think Tiffany's shaking her head too. We've got to be prepared that a second wave might be coming back. So again, getting back to your planning as you're ramping up, and you're ramping to come out of this, what happens if there is a phase 2 or a second wave, and what are your plans at that point in time? I think the other piece is that with a lot of small businesses, what happens if one or more or all of your employees get COVID-19 at the same time? So, it gets back to good business planning, disaster recovery protocols. These are the types of things that we should be proactively thinking about as leaders in terms of how we're going to weather that storm.
And I was listening to a doctor last week who said something that I thought was really simple, but something that we're not hearing a lot. We've gone through this first wave. We've learned some things. We've learned what's works. We've learned what hasn't worked. So this doctor said there's going to be, he says, he doesn't have a crystal ball, but in his expert opinion, there's going to be another wave. But the good news is we're not going to go, what now? Like we kind of did with the first one. We're all scrambling, just trying to figure it out. Well, we've kind of already been through it. So we already have a plan in place. If we've done this right, we've already had a plan in place to encounter the second wave. And so now we can do the second wave even better.
And that makes sense, because working in marketing, we like statistics, we like data, and we get data from the past. And if, the thing that correlates most to this is that people have looked at is the 1918 flu epidemic, and there were waves. It was not a 2 months process. So I think it is prudent to say, okay, and maybe it actually does make sense to have probably early on to bring your crew in and say, hey, those 2 months, what did we do right?
Yeah.
What did we do wrong? So that when that second wave hits, we don't do that wrong stuff again. We just do the right stuff and get more buy-in that way.
And I think it's always important, right, to plan for your worst possible case scenario and hope for the best, right? So rather than operate your business like, hey, we've gone out of this, we'll be fine. There's not going to be a second. We've gone through is the worst thing you can do. Plan as if it's going to happen and hope that it doesn't. But plan as if it's going to.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's a theme in my life. But yeah, so that means how should, or it sort of makes you think like, as we enter into the new normal, which is another phrase that I'm going to grow tired of probably in about 10 minutes. But
by the end of the webinar.
By the end of this webinar, I'm going to have to come up with something new. And as we look towards the future, ending of 2020, if the murder hornets don't get us, how should the organizational goals shift? Do you either of you have answers to that?
You want to go?
Well, I think it depends on, like, when you say organizational goals, since I'm in marketing and growth, I mean, in communications, sales goals are top of mind, revenue goals, things of that nature. And, that's really industry specific. And I think it's important to note that even though we're in this COVID-19 crisis, some businesses are even doing better than they were pre-COVID. It's not all doom and gloom out there. That's, for instance, computer software is doing about 50% better than it was pre-COVID. That's astounding. Construction's doing good. There's certain industries that are doing very well. There's some that aren't. So if you're in an industry that isn't doing well, let's say like the entertainment industry right now, in travel industry, which is down about 40%, then you might need to change your goals. Like if your goal was to increase revenue by 25%, I think it's time to reevaluate that. But also what's more important to that is, before kind of saying, you know what, I'm giving up on this goal, I think it's also important to say, is there another way to achieve that goal? I was speaking, I did a webinar, I think it was either last week or the week before. I have no concept of time anymore. But there was a lot of restaurant owners on that call. And so I just said, you're used to having people come into your restaurant. A lot of restaurants are depending on like Grubhub and delivery. But what happens if you do what like Blue Apron did, for example? Take that favorite recipe that everyone comes into your restaurant for, put all the ingredients and the directions together and sell boxed dinners. Now is the time to think about what can you do instead of focusing, like I always say, on what you can't do. Focus on what you can do, try to determine what that market needs and wants, and then deliver it to them. So I think in terms of goals, it's not just a matter of, okay, well, our revenue or sales is down by however much, we just need to cut the goal. Before you cut the goal, it's just more important to say, is there another way of achieving that? Mm-hmm. Let's brainstorm. And again, talk to your employees. See if there is a new way. Amazing to see what kind of new ideas can be thrown about.
Yeah, and I think, you should relook at them. I mean, a lot of organizations kind of set it and forget it, right? They set their annual goals at the beginning of the year, and then they never revisit it to see, how are we progressing towards those. So I think it's important during times like this to be really fluid and to constantly be reevaluating what those goals look like and readjusting, because the organizations that don't have a plan, that don't have goals, that don't have a line of sight to how they're going to get to the end, aren't going to make it to the other side. And so, Tiffany's absolutely right. Being innovative, getting creative, being agile are going to be really important things for organizations to do during this period and coming out of post-COVID.
Because during any time like this, if we look at the housing market issue that we had in the last horrible recession we had in the late 2000s, some of the greatest inventions were birthed, right? We had Groupon, and
yeah,
we had Uber,
yeah,
and so, instead of, so we're going to get a lot of fantastic startups out of this that simply are, meeting the demands of the marketplace. But before this new fantastic startup comes about to kind of take the business, what can your business do to evolve to answer that? That's really the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great. And we are coming towards sort of the end of our time today. So I wanted to give, if there are any questions that I didn't get to, any sort of last minute things that you want to make sure that business owners, as they reopen, that they want to think about, questions they need to be asking, now is your chance, because I have not asked, I'm certain, every question that's out there, but I want to give you two women time to fill the space as you seem fit to impart your wisdom.
Well, one thing I'd have to say in terms of just communicating about how you're reopening is sometimes you'll hear somebody say, I've already emailed them. I don't need to keep saying it over. Yes, 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 you need to keep saying it over and over again in a wide variety of ways, because not everybody digests things the first time, as we know, and they don't all digest things the same way. So as you're reopening, you want to make sure you're covering all your channels of communications, whether it be through email newsletter, social media, through meetings, whether it be virtually from your customer service person, actually point blank giving a call to the current clients and saying it. So social media, if I haven't said it, website, and don't bury it in there. Make it front and center on your homepage. You cannot communicate enough. I'd rather see somebody say, man, if you didn't know that, you must have been hiding underneath a rock, versus I didn't hear that. It's always better to over communicate versus under communicate.
Agreed. I would say just from the HR front, keep in mind that there have been a lot of changes in response to COVID-19 in the HR arena. So for small business owners, remember that the Family First Corona Response Act is still in place, which provides for paid leave for employees who are impacted by coronavirus. The CARES Act had several provisions in it for employer payroll tax credits and for getting credits back for employees who were impacted by COVID-19, as well as if you're applied for any of the PPP loans. So it's a little complicated out there. So keep in mind that a lot of those requirements and contingencies are in place until the end of the year. And so make sure that you're paying attention to that, especially with the Family First Corona Response Act. That's a big one for bringing people back in. And then, like Tiffany, just make sure to communicate actively and often with your employees in terms of your expectations. Make sure you keep two-way communication between your employees so that you can make sure that you build the team and the work environment and the rebound plan that you want coming out of this.
I'd like to add one thing too on just email, because throughout COVID-19, everybody's been sending out a whole lot more emails. So we were going through a really awesome open rate on emails, but now it's starting to get worse than it was before COVID, because everybody's been reading email. However, that doesn't mean you don't send email. The best email to send right now is one with a video in it. If you send it with video, the open rate dramatically increases. So again, it's a matter of using your creativity to get your message across.
That's awesome.
That is true. And I wanted to highlight, piggyback, and give a real world example to talking about making sure you're communicating on your website. There is a restaurant, a small business where I know the people who own it. The grandson is in class with my kids in my elementary school. One of the waitresses lives in my neighborhood, and so I also really enjoy this restaurant. They have great pizza, they have great Italian food, and they just opened up, they're right near me, and I have really wanted.
That means Tommie probably knows them too.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm not naming names here.
What you're talking about.
I'm not naming names here, but I really like this restaurant, but I keep going to their website, and I don't know how to. It says that they deliver, but it doesn't tell me how. It doesn't give me a menu. I can't. So I'm like, I don't have your menu memorized. So I just call and say, hello, I would like the shrimp scampi and a giant cheese pizza, and do I pay for it? I don't, so I'm just like, well, this is too confusing, so I'm just gonna go here because I I will represent all of the public. There's a lot on my plate right now. I'm working, I'm homeschooling, I'm doing a lot of laundry and cooking a lot of meals. So I need some things to be spoon fed to me. And so as you're talking about the communication, like spoon feed, we're getting a little bit, we're a little bit weary of some of this stuff, but make it easy for your employees and make it easy for your target market because there is enough hard.
Well, and when you spoon feed and you over communicate like that, you also are telling your customer that we know what's going on. We got things taken care of. We got you. So in essence, whether or not you're saying I'm doing this to keep you safe, it's saying what we're doing is here to keep you safe.
Yeah.
That's the psychology of it. So when you don't do that, people are like, I don't know if they got their stuff together. They may not be following like what the CDC is saying. I'm going somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, ladies, for joining me. As always, I learned a lot, and it has been great to hear both of your wisdom, and I hope that everyone watching this has learned a lot as well. And as always, if you have further questions, you can contact me, Elizabeth Johnson Phillips, at ejphillips@MPWRSource.com. That's MPWRSource.com. And if you email me your questions, I will make sure they get out to the appropriate parties. And as always, you can check us out once again at MPWRSource.com. We have COVID-19 resources. We have everything from scripts on different infographics and things on how to reopen your business, and different articles linked there as well. And we will also have links. This webinar will be up on the website, again, with the links to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the CDC. And so hopefully you will find what you need there. And if we don't have what you need, we can help you find what you need. So thanks so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. Bye, Word Girl.
Thank you.
Bye, Tommie.
Uh-huh.